We break down the Baltimore Ravens Week 3 preseason win over the Washington Commanders, talk about Ronnie Stanley, Tyus Bowser, roster predictions, and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we've returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for listening today. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube in video form. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by BriteCo Jewelry and Watch Insurance. BriteCo brings you comprehensive, fast, and affordable jewelry insurance for as low as $5 per month. Check out your special offer for Locked On listeners and get covered under 2 minutes at brite.co/locked on. That's brite.co/locked on. And we're back here. It is a Monday edition, another victory Monday in the preseason. Would you guess the Ravens never losing in the preseason again? I'm calling it here. We talked about it all last week, and I said, look, if they win this game, I'm just going to say they're never going to lose again in the preseason. That's exactly what happened. A 17-15 win over the Washington Commanders in week 3. They're capping off another perfect preseason, 23 straight wins. I mean, dating back to 2015, they haven't lost a preseason game. The leading passer in that game against the Atlanta Falcons, September 3, 2015, Bryn Renner. Terrence McGee, the leading rusher. Marlon Brown, the leading receiver. And you also had guys like Arthur Brown on that team. Darren Waller on that team as well. So you got to go back. Matt Schaub, another quarterback on that team. So impressive win by the Ravens. It wasn't the prettiest win overall, but they got the job done. We're going to talk about the offense in the first segment, defense in the second segment, get into who helped their stock, who hurt their stock, and that will tie into our third segment, which will be some roster predictions Baltimore having to get down from 80 to 53 players by Tuesday, August 30th here, 4 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll get into some conversations about that in the final segment. Also talking about Ronnie Stanley and Tyus Bowser and what happened with them over the weekend. So let's dive into all of that now. Before we do that, though, if you heard this on YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in video form. Be sure to subscribe to this channel. Like the video as well. It helps out a ton. We put out daily Ravens content 5 days per week. So thank you to everybody who is subscribed already. I appreciate you, and to everybody who is not yet subscribed, I highly recommend you do so. Just a personal opinion there. But also in audio form, thank you so much for tuning in there as well, whether you get it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We have it anywhere you get your podcasts, and it's the same show, both audio and video form. And also be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. But let's now dive into this week 3 preseason win for the Ravens again, 17-15 over Washington. It was a game where a lot of starters didn't play for either side. The Commanders didn't really play a lot of their guys. The Ravens didn't play most of theirs, but it shows their depth. Again, it's what they have done, building depth in so many different seasons here with guys leaving. We've seen the Ravens lose a lot of key depth, and they just keep retaining it and bringing in new guys. Now, part of that is at the quarterback position, where we saw Tyler Huntley play just a few series and then end up leaving the game. He had two of 4, 25 yards, so nothing too special to write home about, but he wasn't the main quarterback in this game. It was Anthony Brown, who finished 15 of 19, 256 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. Brown is somebody who, to me, is proven that he at the very least, deserves a spot on the Ravens practice squad. And if the Ravens were in a situation where they were keeping 3 quarterbacks, I would be more than happy to have Anthony Brown on this roster now. Kind of right now with what I'm thinking, and maybe this is the consensus, but at least in my opinion, I just think Baltimore needs too many other bodies at other positions for them to keep 3 quarterbacks, and we'll talk about that a bit in the final segment too. So right now he is off my roster, but he is like the perfect third quarterback option for the Ravens behind Lamar Jackson and behind Tyler Huntley. And honestly, at this point, if the Ravens do decide to move on from Tyler Huntley, which again, I don't see them doing right now, but if they decide to do that in the future, I'd be confident right now in Anthony Brown maybe stepping into being the number 2 guy. Now, the experience isn't there like Tyler Huntley has based off of last year, but still, he's a player that I think proved a lot throughout the course of this preseason and led the Ravens, on a lot of great drives over the course of the 3 games. So I'm impressed with him. Running the ball, the Ravens didn't really have the best day. They only averaged 1.5 yards per carry, so in fact, it was not a good day overall. 2.4 yards per carry for Tyler Beatty, had 5 carries for 12 yards, led the team in carries again. and couldn't get over 3 yards per carry. Again, with that, also you have Anthony Brown 3 for 8, Nate McCrary 4 for 1, and Mike Davis 2 for 0. So yeah, not a good day running the ball. Wouldn't say it was their best effort overall. I will say on Tyler Beatty's behalf, though, I think he has looked better than the box score stats show. It was not a pretty preseason for Tyler Beatty box score wise. Did score the touchdown in week 2 against Arizona. I mean, it's really the same with all the running backs. I mean, Justice Hill had a decent, good first preseason game in terms of like actual box score, but then I think 5 for 5 in the second game, and then didn't really do a ton in this third game too. I think for what the Ravens have, you look at their overall running back depth, and if J.K. Dobbins is maybe not at full strength week 1, which again, even if he is, I don't expect him to get a full workload. You're looking at Mike Davis, Tyler Beatty, and in my opinion, Justice Hills. Those 3 running backs are going to have to pick up some slack there. And for Hill, who, decently strong preseason, but nothing to necessarily write home about. Tyler Beatty looked a bit better than the box score. Mike Davis had some moments too. Not super duper inspiring, but you hope it just comes with the territory of them playing their second, third string offensive line and maybe just, unfamiliar with the playbook for some of these guys. So we'll figure it out what ends up happening throughout the rest of the regular season here as we come up upon that. But I am cautiously optimistic in this running back group. There are some players out there right now. I mean, Kenyon Drake recently released by the Las Vegas Raiders. I think at this point, Kenyon Drake is a better player than a Mike Davis, but maybe the Ravens do value having the consistency of having a guy there throughout the entire offseason. And by no means do I think Davis is a bad player, but that's where they are right now. Wide receiver-wise, how about DeMarcus Robinson? When you're talking about wide receivers, he let his debut shine for the Ravens. Ended up finishing 4 receptions, 135 yards, and a touchdown. Had the slickest, the filthiest double move I think I've seen in a little while now. And look, he's a player that has been in Kansas City for 5 years. He has done it against first-string players. He should be able to do it in a preseason game against second, third, fourth stringers. That's what should have happened. Marcus Robinson proved that he could go out there and do what he was supposed to do and look pretty good while doing it too. I mean, he can play a role. Again, not necessarily a needle-moving signing. It's not trading for Deebo Samuel or DK Metcalf or whatnot, but they got him for just over $1 million, about $895,000 of that guaranteed. You're not asking him to come in and be a number 1 wideout. That's Rashad Bateman's job. You're not even asking him to come in and maybe be a number 2 guy if things go well with Devin Duvernay. Number 3 with James Prochet. So he provides a compliment. Not the speediest guy in the world. Only ran a 4.59 at the combine. What seems for him probably all those years ago out of Florida. But he's a player that I think can play a role for them. And I think that is what they needed. They didn't need, they could definitely use one. But, they didn't need a star at the receiver position, like a star right now. I think Rashad Bateman can turn into that star. They should definitely look to maybe upgrade there. But at the same time, do you want to do that in an offense that is probably going to go back to a run-heavy style and pay a receiver $20-25 million? I think that's part of the reason they traded Marquise Brown outside of the whole trade request thing. So I was very impressed with DeMarcus Robinson overall in this game. You also look at the other players. Benjamin Victor had a really nice game, 4 for 74. Josh Oliver, 2 for 41. Then it was only a bunch of 1 receptions here. Micaiah Polk, 1 for 10. Riley Webb, 1 for 8. Shamar Bridges, 1 for 8. Ben Mason, 1 for 4. Nate McCrary actually had 2 receptions for 1 yard. And Tyler Beatty, 1 for 0. So, yeah, I think that the 2 shining stars there at the receiver group were Benjamin Victor and DeMarcus Robinson. And I think that, while I don't have Benjamin Victor on my final roster at this point, I think that for right now, DeMarcus Robinson showed that he can play a role in this offense, which I think is really good. Now, the offense, it sputtered a little bit overall. First down-wise, Washington just obliterated Baltimore. 22 first downs to 9 first downs. The Ravens only go 1 for 8 on third down here. They do total 302 total yards and average 8.2 yards per play. So the big playability was there. DeMarcus Robinson, you want to talk about big playability. DeMarcus Robinson averaged 33.8 yards per catch. Benjamin Victor, 18.5 yards per catch. Josh Oliver, 20.5 yards per catch. So they were getting some big plays in here, but not necessarily efficient on third down. Baltimore also only held the ball for 20 minutes and 31 seconds. Washington dominated time of possession, holding the ball for 39 minutes, 29 seconds, something we usually are flipping around for the Ravens. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out for the team as this regular season goes on. But again, I expect the Ravens to kind of get back to that dominant run-heavy offense, not necessarily meaning they're not going to throw the ball. I think they are. but we're going to probably see them go back to that a little bit, especially as the running backs get more comfortable and fully healthy, like J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. But overall, we saw the depth from this Ravens offense in the final preseason game, and they got a 17-15 win out of it, so I think that is very impressive overall. But coming up on Locked On Ravens, still a ton to talk about here on the show. We're going to be diving into the defensive review of Baltimore's 17-15 win over Washington in week 3 of the 2022 preseason. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about BriteCo. And we've all seen those engagement fails and sometimes rings falling in vents or getting lost in the ocean. And you don't want to be that guy. And you certainly don't want it to be splattered all over the internet. The guys at BriteCo Jewelry Insurance will make sure you get a replacement for the full value of that ring, no matter if it's lost or stolen or you just can't figure out what happened to it. Insurance can also be something that can be a little annoying. So the guys at BriteCo turn the whole experience around. So it's probably the easiest thing you can do for yourself this week. There's no excuses. For $5 a month, you get totally comprehensive coverage and it won't take you more than 2 minutes on your cell phone. Check it out, brite.co/locked on. And I do want to tell you a bit about Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, whether you want it from a community of local hosts, browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, Canada, and the UK, book a spacious SUV or a minivan for a family road trip, get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or a holiday. You can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B. You can test drive the new electric vehicle you've had your eyes on to see how it fits your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance as well. Terms and conditions and exclusions apply. So ditch the boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker, your host, still here with you again. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, follow along with us in audio form as well, and make sure you check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview starting August 31st, an 8-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NFL season. Local team experts of the Locked On Podcast Network and Odyssey NFL Insiders all combining into one Ultimate NFL Preview starting August 31st. Search for the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. But let's now dive into the defensive performance here for the Ravens in this 2022 Week 3 preseason win. Again, 17-15 over the Commanders, 23 straight. Their Jordan win. Their Jordan win at 23 there. But defensively, they were okay. I didn't think it was anything overly spectacular. Again, I mentioned Washington picked up 22 first downs, went 6 of 16 on third down, so it wasn't necessarily super efficient by them there, but not necessarily horrendous. 2 for 3 on fourth down as well, so they were able to pick up some yards there. 388 total yards. Again, the time possession battle, pretty dominant there, but Baltimore's defense did show some flashes, and I want to talk about those flashes. Now, leading the team in tackles was Josh Ross, and I think for what you're looking at, Baltimore does have a ton of great inside linebacker depth in terms of these young guys. And Josh Ross is someone who has burst onto the scene and I think has really solidified himself as that fourth inside linebacker on the roster. Now, I don't necessarily think that Baltimore is going to keep 5 in this situation just because, again, like the quarterback situation, they are probably going to need bodies elsewhere, offensive line, cornerback, maybe even wide receiver, who knows. So inside linebacker, with the way that they can deploy their safeties, I don't think they need more than 4. So that comes down to a battle between a guy like Josh Ross and a guy like Kristen Welch. Both guys performing very well. I mentioned Josh Ross, 11 tackles in this game. Well, Kristen Welch not far behind with 10 himself. And what you have is 2.5 sacks by Kristen Welch. So he all over the field. Really impressed me. 3 quarterback hits overall. So I think what Josh Ross brings, though, is a lot. I mean, he has shown the ability to go out there and fly to the football, hit stick running backs, be solid in coverage as well. He is that, like, he's the mold of undrafted free agent inside linebackers Baltimore has had. You know, you're going back, you want to talk about Jameel McClain, Donnell Ellerbe, Zach Orr being some of those guys who have really stepped up as an undrafted inside linebacker. Now, something that Kristen Welch has done very well over his tenure in Baltimore is play special teams, so I think that's something to keep in mind, and this performance definitely helped him. I had him pretty squarely off the roster before this game. He I think, made a case for himself in this one, but I think if it comes down to it, Josh Ross is probably that 4. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just where I am with that right now, and again, we'll get more into that in the final segment. Baltimore did, again, have 5 sacks overall, though 2.5 of those coming from Kristen Welch. You had half sack coming from Geno Stone, a bunch of half sacks. Jeremiah Moon, half sack. Stephen Means, half sack. Isaiah Mack, half sack. Broderick Washington, half sack as well. So a bunch of half sack guys, and then you have Kristen Welch at 2.5. But we saw the Ravens. It was almost, first of all, I want to say Sam Howell played really well for Washington. Like he played well, and I'd feel confident over there in Washington with Sam Howell. 24-35, 280 yards. He had a touchdown as well, 8 carries for 62 yards on the ground as well. He was elusive too. And the Ravens, they couldn't quite on some of these plays. They couldn't quite wrap up Sam Howell and bring him down. I know Broderick Washington had a play where he pretty much had Sam Howell and just couldn't bring him down. Ended up recovering, and the sack was still made, but it was one of those elusive slip away plays. I know Stephen Means, Sam Howell kind of pump faked a little bit, and Stephen Means jumped up in the air, and Sam Howell just kind of zoomed past him a little bit. We saw a couple missed tackles as well. So that's something I think we definitely like to see the Ravens clean up on a little bit, because when the games count and you can't wrap up quarterbacks to bring them down, it can really hurt, especially if there's positive yardage gain for the offense there. But you look at the battles overall, we did talk a bit about the inside linebacker group. I think in the secondary, you had Tony Jefferson have a decently nice bounce back game from what happened in Arizona in week 2, 9 tackles for him. Geno Stone had 7 tackles. Darius Washington, 6 tackles. There are some tough decisions to be made over there. Aaron Crawford ended up leaving this game with an injury, and John Harbaugh said it could be serious. We don't know the extent of that right now at the time of this recording, but depending on what happens there, Baltimore still has some defensive line depth. Not talking about their big 6, I guess I'd call it, with the 3 veterans and the 3 younger guys. But you have Isaiah Mack. Rayshon Nichols actually had a really good game in this one, coming up with 8 tackles overall. And I think Isaiah Mack showed that he can, again, be that interior pass rush presence. They're pretty set at defensive line. Even if Travis Jones has to miss some time and go on IR or something, I'm very confident because we saw some good play from Rayshon Nichols. We saw Isaiah Mack do that. And even hopefully Aaron Crawford's injury is not serious. He also showed some stuff. Now, I don't think guys like Aaron Crawford and Isaiah Mack make the Baltimore's practice squad. I think they probably will get picked up somewhere else. If they do make it, that is a very big win for the Ravens if they can get rid of those guys and then bring them back a day later. But I think for what the Ravens have on their team now, even if Travis Jones has to miss some time and even go on injured reserve, I'd feel confident if they wanted to keep 7 defensive linemen off the bat with some handshake deals going on here or there and then kind of figuring stuff out. So defensive line, I was pretty impressed with. Stephen Means also, he had some flashes as well. I mean, they're gonna need Stephen Means on this team unless they bring in somebody else. I mean, the outside linebacker depth right now, Adafe Elway, obviously the big fish there, number 1 guy. Then you have Justin Houston, Dalen Hayes, and Stephen Means. Those are your 4, unless you want to keep a 5th like a Chuck Wiley or a Jeremiah Moon. The other option there would be to bring somebody from the outside in. So we'll see. I mean, I thought Stephen Means played decently well overall. Secondary-wise, we talked about it a little bit. I thought Tony Jefferson had that nice bounce-back game. He's competing with Geno Stone or Darius Washington. Kind of talked about it a bit after the game, too, saying that, he understands the business, would love to stay a Raven and is always a Raven. And really, really good answers from him, but knows that, this is a business. And I think that he will probably be one of these guys with the handshake deals. And this is kind of going on what we're going to talk about in the final segment a little bit. But I do think that with the talent they have in the secondary, they're going to either have to keep everybody and sacrifice at another position, or they're just going to have to get rid of a guy like Darius Washington or a Geno Stone. So that's going to be interesting to see what they do there. Corner-wise, Brandon Stephens, I know a lot of people have been getting on Brandon Stephens. I don't think he's played as poorly as some people think he has. He's also adjusted. I mean, Brandon Stephens has been all over the map over the course of the last, 3, 4, 5 years for him, playing running back, moving over to safety, now moving over to corner, and then going back to safety in his first year with the Ravens, and then going back to corner now in his second year with them. So he is learning a bunch of new positions. I'm cutting Brandon Stephens a little bit of slack here. I still think there were some things he does need to clean up on, but look, I'm not going to rag on him too much because I think, again, he's someone who is still learning a little bit. And I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt for that. So I think Stephens, again, and he's also shown some good tape as well. I'm not saying he's played terribly. So that's where I am on Brandon Stephens right now. Thoreau Worley has had a decently okay preseason. I mean, compared to last year, it's been night and day. I still don't think it's enough for him to make the roster, but it's, again, something else in the secondary where you're looking for maybe some depth in the case of guys going down or not being able to come back. David Vereen, another guy in that secondary overall. So, yeah, I mean, overall, Baltimore, they gave up some big chunk plays. I mean, you had some guys really coming up big for Washington. It was really like consistency for them. It wasn't like DeMarcus Robinson 4 for 135. You had 4 for 45, 2 for 42, 3 for 41, 4 for 37, 2 for 36, 5 for 36. So right in that 45 to 36 mark, they had how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players who had anywhere from 36 to 45 yards. So very competent outing from the Ravens defense, I would say. And hey, they got the win. They got some stops on late in the game that they were able to make, and they end up getting the win, which I know is not the most important thing in the preseason. You want to just see the guys get out healthy, but for now, Baltimore did extend that preseason streak to 23 games. Again, a streak that spans almost 7 years now, dating back to 2015. Went into our final break here on the show, though. Coming up, we're going to be diving into some roster discussion, talking about Ronnie Stanley, Tyus Bowser, some Poe talk as well, and more. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about PrizePicks. And fantasy has been a big part of my life for a really long time. We've done the Locked On Ravens fantasy leagues, which has been really fun. And I've been in multiple leagues. It's a lot of fantasy over here. And there are so many formats you can use. And for PrizePicks, you can pick 2 to 5 players, and if they will score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And they offer projections on any sport that you watch. So that includes NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, college basketball, and more. And just going to be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. It's safe and fast withdrawals as well. They're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada as well. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users are going to receive a 100% instant deposit match for up to $100 with a promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form as well. But let's talk about some of the news that happened over the weekend for the Ravens, not preseason related. Well, I guess some of it will be preseason related. The Ravens on Friday, good news for Ronnie Stanley. Activated off the PUP list after passing his physical. I mean, we had talked throughout the last week about what is going on with Ronnie Stanley. We had heard coming off the PUP list after the Arizona game. Well, we got that. That's what happened. But I think now the question is there enough ramp-up time for Ronnie Stanley to be ready for week 1 to come back at full strength? And what's it going to look like? How's the mobility going to be? That ankle injury, we have talked about it. Very brutal, like very horrifying, and something very tough to come back from. Stanley went out there in week 1 last year against Las Vegas and just did not look like the same player. And that does not benefit the Ravens. It does not benefit Ronnie Stanley. So for the second surgery, probably a smart decision overall, I would say. But now you're looking at a player that I think has had the time to recover. I'm hoping feels more confident in that ankle and will hopefully go out there and be able to play at a high level, because for the Ravens offensive line, right, they can do the kind of patchwork at left tackle with Jawan James and hope that works out, and maybe it will, and I'm hoping it does. You can put Morgan Moses there, Patrick McCary, maybe even Daniel Lele if you wanted to, but the offensive line, in my opinion, it hinges on Ronnie Stanley. Like the success of the offensive line, if you want the best version of the Ravens offensive line, it absolutely has to include Ronnie Stanley. 100%. One of the best run blockers in this league. One of the best pass protectors in this league, too. Gets out in space very well when fully healthy. He does it all. And that's not even an exaggeration. He does it all. So important to the Ravens. And I've said before, it all starts up front. So for me, Ronnie Stanley is just such a massive part of what the Ravens do on offense, and should hopefully be back 100% at some point. Don't know when, don't know if he's going to be ready for week 1 yet, but that is still the activation off the PUP list is very, very positive news overall. Now, in the not so positive news category, but somewhat expected, is that Tyus Bowser was moved over to the reserve physical PUP list. So he joins Gus Edwards and missing at least the first 4 games of the year. Now, this was something, again, I personally expected. I didn't expect him to be ready for week 1. And honestly, he might not be ready till the middle of the year. I mean, that injury, this torn Achilles, suffered right at the beginning of January. So, it's not like he suffered at the beginning of the year in the middle of the season. It was right at the end of the year. I think Bowser does return at some point this season. I think for David Ajabo, it's a bit more unclear because he suffered that injury a couple months later in March. But I think for Bowser, he was arguably the Ravens' most consistent defender last season. He was that good for them. He was a player that I know a lot of people were expecting to take that leap. We talked about that last year, and he did it. He took a huge leap for them, very versatile. So he's a big part of that defense. And I think for what the Ravens need, he's kind of like that perfect plug-and-play player overall. But for now, he's going to be on the reserve PUP list, and he'll miss the first 4 games of the year. So again, guys like Dalen Hayes and Steven Means and all these other players are going to have to step up in his absence and make sure the Ravens can get pressure on the quarterback alongside their defensive line, which I think will be able to get some more pressure this year overall. We also had a mascot injury. Yeah, a mascot injury. Poe, the Ravens mascot, ends up getting injured in a Youth First Mascot Football halftime performance show and has to get carted off the field. I mean, the trainers attended to him. It was big. It was actually pretty big news overall. Now, Poe did return in the second half of the game, and very speculative from a lot of people that there was someone else behind the costume, which I'd probably have to agree with. But yeah, I mean, prayers to Poe. Crazy how that can happen. And if that had happened last year, like throughout everything they had went through injury wise, and the mascot gets injured like that, it would have been mayhem. And it honestly still kind of was mayhem. It's not totally unheard of for a mascot to get injured this way, but it was definitely something else and something that was totally unexpected. So again, hopefully the injury was not as serious as it appears. The Ravens did post an update saying, Poe ruffled some feathers, had the ice pack on his knee and whatnot. So yeah, prayers up to Poe. Hopefully it's not as serious as it looked. But now we're going to talk about some roster stuff real quick. We're going to be diving into our full roster projections in tomorrow's episode, so be sure to stay tuned for that. You don't want to miss that one. But some kind of like stuff to preface it, to almost preview it a little bit. Baltimore does have to get down to 53 players by tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And this is a decision. There are multiple decisions that Eric DeCosta and company have to make. They're going to be tough. And they are the good decisions to have, the good problems to have. You don't want to have like 46 guys are comfortable in and then be like, oh, we don't really know who to put on the final 53 now because the guys aren't good enough. You want to have, 60, 70 guys. You have to make tough decisions on overall. Now the Ravens, they did start a little bit of their cut downs over the course of the weekend a little bit with some minor moves, but the big moves, they'll all come in one wave. And as I kind of talked about, we'll kind of review the points I made earlier in the episode. I think Baltimore will probably keep 2 quarterbacks at this point. I think Justice Hill does make this roster. I think DeMarcus Robinson pretty set in stone there. I think defensively, Josh Ross is that inside linebacker, that 4th inside linebacker for me. Safety-wise, I still have 5, but I could see it being Geno Stone or Darius Washington, with Tony Jefferson being a handshake deal, then coming back to be maybe that 6th guy. And part of that reason is because I think Darius Washington, the Ravens do view more as a slot cornerback, and I think that could help with the positional versatility overall. Defensive line-wise, I think something that will be telling, and we'll kind of monitor this throughout the week, is whether the Ravens do keep 6 or 7 defensive linemen. If the Ravens do keep an Isaiah Mack or an Aaron Crawford, depending on the injury, if they keep 7 guys, so that would be Calais Campbell, Brent Urban, Michael Pierce, Justin Madubuike, Travis Jones, Broderick Washington, and whatever 7th guy you want to put in there, that to me signals that I think Travis Jones could be heading to IR for a couple weeks, which I think is fine. If you want to clear up roster spot that way, still have some defensive line depth, I think that's all right. But if they only keep 6 guys, that to me signals that I think the Ravens are just going to wait it out with Jones's injury and not put him on injury reserve. I could be wrong. I still think there is definitely a possibility he could be on injury reserve either way, regardless. But I think if they keep 7 defensive linemen, that's something to monitor in terms of Travis Jones potentially heading on IR. Other IR candidates, I think Charlie Kohler's probably a pretty obvious one overall. David Ajabo, there's some. So my understanding of this, and I know Just Rebick of The Athletic talked about this, the Ravens cannot put David Ajabo on the non-football injury list anymore because it was some timing issue with his contract, and because he signed late or something, he's no longer eligible for it. So now he has to be on the 53-man roster and then get put into reserve, so that the Ravens have to kind of account an extra roster spot for David Ajabo is my understanding of the situation. That's what I've read up on a little bit. So if that situation is what it is, then they have to figure that out and maybe say, well, now who's the guy we're going to get rid of now for David Ajabo, which is not ideal, I would say, overall. But yeah, I mean, other than that, offensive line is another position where I was pretty set on Ben Powers getting traded. So the fact that he is, not getting any snaps in the Ravens game, and also side note, Isaiah Likely not getting snaps. So that's a pretty good sign to me. He's going to be having a big role on this team. Maybe the Ravens do move on from a guy like Tristan Colon and somehow hope he falls to the practice squad, which I do not think is happening. But maybe they have to do that. Maybe they move someone else to IR that people aren't expecting. Maybe they keep an extra tight end in Josh Oliver, keep 5 guys, move Kohler to IR, and have Oliver as the 4th tight end until Kohler comes back. There are a lot of options. Maybe Jalen Armour Davis goes on IR after the roster things happen. Handshake deals, I talked about that a little bit. Offensively, I don't really see too many of those options. I think it's more defensively. I think Tony Jefferson is a prime candidate there. Josh Bynes, another one I could see. Also, Stephen Means, another candidate for that as well. Brent Urban, someone I could see as a handshake deal. And for those who don't know what a handshake deal is, it's where the Ravens would release a player, but have what is called a handshake deal to say, we're going to release you right now. We're going to cut you, but we're going to bring you back immediately after guys go on IR. So when you create roster spaces from IR, that's what happens. And a side note on IR, the reason the Ravens can't place players on IR right now that they want to come back is if someone is placed on IR right now before 53-man rosters are set, that means they automatically miss the entire season. So Vince Beagle was placed on IR, he misses the entire year. If the Ravens do it after the 53-man rosters are set, that means they only have to miss a few games minimum before they come back. So that's why you're going to see a lot of guys make the roster who were injured and then move to IR a day after the injuries or the day after the roster is set overall. So just two side notes on that. But yeah, we have a ton to talk about overall with the roster stuff. We're going to be diving into more of it tomorrow, doing some final predictions overall. So a really fun episode coming up tomorrow. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, I'll be diving into those full roster predictions and more. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.